Good afternoon. It's good to see you all. Hopefully you enjoyed your lunch out in the park. I saw many of you out there on this beautiful day. My name is Caitlin Beatty, and I'm the editorial director of Brazos Press, as well as a former attendee of Calvary St. George's. And I just love being back in this space and hope and trust that the people at this church know how beautiful and unique a space it is. I'm never going to find another church that's as good as Cal St. G. I've just resigned myself to the fact. It's my pleasure today to introduce Elizabeth Oldfield, a writer, podcaster, and consultant who I've gotten to know primarily for having edited her fantastic book, Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. I'm not supposed to have favorites, you know? Like, all my authors are like my children. I love them equally. But Elizabeth's book is one that sits in my personal book collection, and I've probably recommended to 20, 25 people over the last year. I'm recommending it to you as well. Elizabeth started her career as a researcher with the BBC before serving as the director of Theos, a British think tank focused on religion and society. Since 2017, Elizabeth has hosted the podcast The Sacred, where she has practiced the art of listening and humble curiosity with a wide range of leaders and thinkers, from social psychologist Jonathan Haidt to body feminist commentator Caitlin Moran. I think body is the right use of that term here. From Christian activist Shane Claiborne to Dame Prue Leith, who you all might know as one of the judges on the Great British Bake Off. When you have Paul Hollywood on, I would like to be there, just for like my own personal research. So that's the official bio. Here are some other more interesting bits about Elizabeth. So she became a Christian in a charismatic experience at a youth rally in the UK. She and her husband Chris live with several housemates in an intentional community in a home in South London, where they co-own with another couple. They share their mortgage, they share a bank account, they share household responsibilities. She is one of the few Brazos authors to have gotten away with a fair amount of swearing in her book. I think we just kind of give a pass to the Brits. Like, maybe the F word isn't as bad in the UK as it is in the United States. And finally, and maybe most importantly and most pertinent to Elizabeth's talk today, she is someone who's very comfortable speaking alongside a wide range of thinkers and leaders. She was telling me yesterday that, as with so many people who are trying to carve out this space of actual listening across the aisles, across the divides, she gets critique from both the left and the right. And I often think of that as a sign that someone is doing something right, not for the sake of just being a centrist for its own sake, but as a way of modeling that actually connecting with another human being, listening to them, assuming the best about how they see the world, going forward with a posture that you might actually have something to learn. You might have something to learn from someone you deeply disagree with on many things. This is what I think Elizabeth does best and what makes her a truly charismatic person, which she's going to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Oldfield.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I'm not going to defend myself against the accusations of being sweary, because it's true. So, last year I read a piece, a Substack piece entitled People Who Demand Nothing of You, or Notes on Charismatic People. And it was written by someone who, as far as I know, has no particular or spiritual or religious outlook, and it was sent to me by an atheist friend. And I'm going to quote you a chunk of it. The most likable, charismatic, enjoyable people to be around are people who demand nothing of you. At first I'd written, ask nothing of you, but that didn't feel quite right. It felt too detached, like they wanted nothing from others, like they never invited you to things or asked for commitment, and that's not true of the people I'm thinking of. The most charismatic people I know, who seem to have this radiant, magnetic quality to their presence, are those that actually invite you to loads of things, but are totally okay with you declining, and they really mean it. They don't need anything from you. And this leads you to trust their invitation to engage. Because after all, who is more selfless than someone who appears complete? And despite this, they are being fully mentally and emotionally present with you, making you feel loved and seen and worthy. Interacting with highly charismatic people gives you a high because of the intensity of being seen. And it's rare to encounter people who can really see you, because most people have too much going on in their heads. The difference is in whether they encounter you as an equal or as a means to some other end, and this part never lies. See how they leave you feeling, especially over time. Interactions with them come with the least number of strings attached. It feels like they are just having fun, lightly playing with possibilities. They're not holding love hostage when you don't act in accordance with their desires. They approach your presence with gratitude, but don't demand you stay forever. There is no hint of scarcity. They live in the realm of what is possible and abundant, and they are not afraid of what happens. Because no matter what happens, they know it will be fundamentally okay. And I've noticed that they don't leave what feels like a sticky trace after they're gone. And I remember them vividly, and I'm more touched by them, but it lacks that feeling of molasses. I get sticky traces when I interact with people who guilt me, are passive-aggressive, pedestalize me. I think you can hear that. It's about people who either are looking up to us or looking down at us, can both leave these sticky traces. Ask things of me I don't believe are what they truly want, and if I give it to them anyway, it's like feeding a hungry ghost. Every interaction with them feels like they are saying, please love me, or make me feel okay, or I need you. To be a truly charismatic person, you have to actually like people. And be present. Set down whatever stands between you and vibrant, pulsing reality. It's a lot more like practicing how to freefall than learning how to act in a movie. Well, this post really stayed with me, just because it's a great piece of writing. It's kind of true observations about how it can feel being in the world. And it planted this seed of a kind of painfully sweet longing to be becoming this kind of person. And originally I felt a bit guilty about that. I was like, Lord, why am I so desperate to be this kind of amazing person that this piece is writing about? But the more I sat with it, I begin to see how clearly that in theory, Christians should be amongst the most benevolently charismatic people in the world. If the claims of my faith are true, and I am truly living as if they were true, I actually don't need other people to fill some hole in me. I'm already enough. I can live in a posture of that enoughness, which is the opposite of scarcity, with wide open arms of hospitality. I can invite people in and be delighted when they come and hold it so lightly when they don't. And even more radically, and this is the claim, I am not saying I know exactly how to live this, I might be able to be becoming someone who is fundamentally unafraid, who trusts not that everything will be okay, because unfortunately that is not the promise, but that love is stronger than death. And so everything will be okay in the end. And so growing closer to being this kind of charismatic person has become a bit of a goal of mine, partly because, if I ever need to change course and become an uber villain, which you just got to keep your options open in this world, being able to present in this way is super useful. That's in me too, I'll be honest. But I hope it stays more honestly, because I'm coming to the conclusion that I think this might be a little bit what it looks like to be growing in the fruit of the Spirit. And I love the fruit of the Spirit. But when I rebrand it in my head as becoming a truly charismatic person, it's much more motivating. And there's loads we could drill down into today. There's loads of directions we could take this. What does it mean to live hospitably with wide open doors and hearts and arms? We could get to the real pain point about being people who do not live in fear, given that the Bible is pretty clear that the emotion of fear comes with some soul danger in a way that grief and rage don't always. And this one is tricky for me because anxiety is my particular temptation. And I've actually been talking about that theme a lot over the last 2 weeks while I've been in the US. And if we have some time in the Q&A, we can talk about it then maybe. But for now, I'm going to major on the idea that charismatic people don't demand anything of others. That we can want them, but not need them in that way that lives sticky traces. Because truly charismatic people have a stable sense of self. They neither look down on, nor really look up to other people, but look them in the eye as equals. And I wrote about this in Fully Alive, which I'm really grateful for Caitlin's introduction to, because I still find it hard to describe a year after it came out. But it's a set of personal essays which are about many things, loosely structured around the 7 deadly sins, and how we might be becoming the kind of people the world needs in these times. And in my chapter on envy, I unpacked what I think envy is really rooted in, which is status anxiety and an unstable sense of self. And envy is definitely the least cool of the 7 deadly sins. You've noticed this? It's maybe why I don't get asked to talk about it a lot. I forced it into this one. Because lust is sexy, let's be honest. Greed might make you rich. Gluttony is personified in my head as that hedonistic friend you really want at a party. Acedia is really chill. I'm not chill. I am earnest and intense, and therefore will never really be cool. Pride, love yourself, self-love. It's the defining social virtue of our culture. And wrath, especially right now, when we are directing it at the wrong people, the other guys, is a really quick route to acclaim from our own tribe. But envy and the cluster of emotions, status anxiety, shame, insecurity, they all boil down to this most tender thing, a deep-seated sense of not enoughness. They're a small psychic septic wound, an embarrassing and painful secret, the verruca of temptations. But it's unsurprising that we feel some of this. I've just come from Washington, D.C. and Princeton, where status anxiety, status awareness was pretty evident. You guys don't struggle with this here in New York, right? I can just tell already. Actually, I think this group is very unusual, possibly, in this city today. Because without a transcendent frame for human value, basically a religiously or at least philosophically rooted anthropology, inequality, human inequality, seems obvious and intuitive. This is not something we can necessarily come to purely observationally. When you have that, a loss of a transcendent frame, and a supposedly meritocratic, socially mobile society, what excuse might I have for not crushing it? If you weren't in Lindsay's beautiful breakout this morning about shame and insecurity, I would recommend getting hold of it if you can, because she really put her finger on this ability of our culture to impose on us an endemic sense of not enoughness. drives this obsession with self-improvement and goals. And though we rarely say the quiet part aloud, it's at least partly because, honestly, it feels good to be better than other people. Right? It's not just me. Tell me it's not just me. Come on, guys. No one wants to be overlooked. If the choice, as it seems to be, is to be looked down on or looked up to, sure as hell we want to be looked up to. And this desire to avoid being overlooked comes from such a deep place, because everyone is in search of a gaze. In the earliest moments of a human life, a baby is searching for one thing: 2 eyes turned towards it. As writer Andy Crouch puts it, recognition is the first human quest. We might like to think we define ourselves, love ourselves, create ourselves. But from our very first moments, we are inescapably social creatures looking outside of ourselves to find our value. And this is a deeply good thing, because it drives us outward into the loving relationships we need to thrive, but it's also our Achilles heel. Because when our need for deep, unconditional attention and affirmation goes unmet, as it frankly almost always partly will in those early years, no matter how good our parenting, we look to wider society to sate that hunger. And the world meets us, often with what Virginia Woolf calls its notorious indifference. William James wrote in 1890 that no more fiendish punishment could be devised, that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed by all members thereof. And this search for recognition becomes a search for attention, and then a search for status, and all we are shown is status in comparison. Figuring it out, triangulating ourselves. Where do we sit in this hierarchy? And this is so part of how humans show up. I was just with my brother, he has a dog, and he was like, oh, it's how dogs work too. Like, when they are sniffing bottoms, they are trying to figure out where they sit in the pack hierarchy. And when they can figure out when they sit in the pack hierarchy, they can relax. Most of the time, it's just below the level of our consciousness. But noticing it feels like part of breaking the spell. I'm feeling a bit like I'm going to make you slightly bum clenchy now, but just bear with me. Think back to when you arrived at this conference. Like, if you were with a big group of friends that you felt really safe with, this might have been less the case. But particularly if you arrived on your own or just with one other person, maybe you hadn't been before, you weren't quite sure what you were coming into. 2 things I am going to posit were probably going on with you. One was what scientists call homophily, and I like to call people like me syndrome, which just means the deep-seated human preference for people like ourselves. And this is just one of the most solid findings in social psychology. And it is seemingly a constant across cultures. It's been around for a long time. We adorably ridiculous, pathetic humans are constantly scanning the world for fragments of our own reflection. And we can immediately hear the ways in which people like me syndrome can lead to some really bad places, right? Around skin color, or around gender, or a range of other things that we rightly have been thinking a bit more about lately. But it holds for like seemingly even more, or the things that we think of as entirely arbitrary. Actually, those things are, possibly arbitrary as well. Things like, if you are a door-to-door salesperson, you are more likely to make a sale if the person that you're trying to sell to shares one physical characteristic with you. And it could be their height, or their hair color, or their eye color. You might find it when you meet someone. I notice it if I meet someone who has the same glasses as me. I'm like, oh, they seem like such a good person. Same brand of notebook. Like, watch yourself as you meet people today. Same music. Like, in some ways this is really obvious, but also it's not obvious, because why? Why does someone having the same taste in notebooks to me make me feel safer? It's homophily. And the other thing that's going on is status awareness, this human equivalent of bottom sniffing. who in the room is high status, who is low status, and how do I fit here? And it's not just the obvious stuff. Like, I don't need to tell you that this goes on in society around money and job titles and hotness, but it really depends on the community that you're in and the values that that community in theory espouses. So in kind of intellectual groupings, it's not going to be about how much you earn. It's going to be about your ability to quote obscure books or be scathing around the right people. In this gathering, it might be someone who can quote Luther in the original German. I don't know. Might be the funniest or the most stylish. Like, what we ascribe status to might change, but we are always doing it. And I don't know if any of you played this game in school drama classes, but in my drama classes, we played an improvisation game where we were handed out cards with a number on them. And we were told to interact with each other depending on how low or high we were on the status scale. And we were 14. They did not need to say anything else. We did not need the sociological unpacking. We might not have known the language, but we knew this in our bones. Philosopher Charles Taylor says, "It shows in our very deportment, the way we walk and move and gesture and speak is shaped from our earliest moments by our awareness that we appear before others, that we stand in public space, and this space is potentially one of respect or contempt, pride or shame." And I remember that game maybe better than any other lesson of my teenage education, because it was like someone had put a spotlight on something that I already knew. The emotions I was trying to act felt real. You know, in the first round, I got a high status card, and the swelling power of it, my word, woo! That's the good stuff. And when I picked the low card for the round 2, the like looming, ominous humiliation in my body, that time around, I reacted to the high card people with a queasy mix of like obsequiousness and hatred. And there were sticky traces everywhere in that room. Every interaction between people who thought themselves above or below someone else felt a bit ick. There was no real connection possible. And it's really tricky, actually, as a writer. One of the things I'm doing when I'm speaking or writing is subtly signaling my status to you. Like, I put on my silver shoes. I have my own personal disco ball. And I like my silver shoes. I like them for myself. But also a bit of me like, they're cool. Maybe they'll think I'm cool. I am dropping intellectual quotes so that you think I'm smart. Sometimes from books I haven't actually read. And it's because I know you are much less likely to listen to me if you think I am lower status than you are. And this is like a formation problem for me. It's a formation problem for anyone trying to speak in public, maybe for all of us in these days. Psychologist Abraham Tesser developed a theory around this, and he called it the self-evaluation maintenance model. And he argued that our sense of self or our self-esteem is largely dependent on our interactions with others, and that on any human interaction we are driven by a desire to maintain or improve our view of our own value. And we spend a lot of time needing other people, even if only subconsciously. A lot of you are ministers or pastors or chaplains, and there'll be slightly different dynamics for you maybe because you have been trained in a different way to observe a group and maybe not think, who's the highest status person here that I can go hang out with, but who's on the edges? Like, who needs a gaze? Who can I go and help? But even that helping in its unhealthy forms can become a form of needing, right? It can become a form of bolstering our sense of self. Because when we really turn our attention to the other, eye to eye, equal to equal, and are, as the piece says, fully emotionally present, they fill our whole gaze, and something extraordinary, something that feels like a blessing, can happen. And it is incredibly unusual. It's why the piece is so compelling, because we can all probably think of times where we've met that or something like that, and it's like this sweet memory. The opposite is so many networking parties, right? Where we go in and people looking over our shoulder to see if the next interesting person's coming on, or I might feel myself itching to look over their shoulder because they're saying something that I've stopped listening to because my mind is too busy and I'm not fully present to them, and therefore they have become boring. They aren't actually boring. No human being is. But my inattention makes them so. But on my best days, which are rare, when I can remember where my identity is actually rooted, I can go in, this is one of my favorite things to do, I can go into networking events with this very impish, mischievous spirit and play with all those games. Like someone asks me what I do, and I can try and triangulate what is the thing I can say that's going to make them most concerned about the status differential between and I won't give specifics, but it's different in every group, particularly with intellectuals. I love this. I'm like, I want to talk about Love is Blind, and I say it as if like it's of the same value as Kant, and then I do like optical lock, just to hold their gaze, and they're looking over my shoulder, and I'm like, how long can you stay talking to me? Because it feels important not to let myself be too formed by the rules of that game. To remind myself, I don't believe in that game. And I do not have to play it. Because I know that some people, like the extreme version of this, is allowing ourselves to feel that our whole lives have been defined by the lack of others' esteem and become embittered, like Iago, by a sense of, do you see that, Iago? Do you think I'm smart now? That's from Shakespeare. By a sense of being overlooked. Even when they experience apparent success, you will probably know someone who in theory has won all the status games and is still like a hungry ghost. In the periods where I have, in theory, some impressive things to show off and show and tell, like societal show and tell, like, look at me, I've got, I wrote an article, or whatever the equivalent is in your world. It is delicious. The high status card, when you draw it, is delicious, initially. And my ego unfurls and purrs like a happy cat. But it doesn't last that high. My own sense of satisfaction in a job well done does linger, but the acclaim, it leaves me not content, but wired like a child after a birthday party, heading for a crash and then craving more. And I'm increasingly convinced that whether we are winners or losers in the status game, and almost all of us, if we live long enough, will be both. We are all being played. Status differentials are distancing. They make it really difficult to meet people as they really are, to see them in that beautiful moment of happy self-surrender, to experience what Hartmut Rosa calls resonance, and Martin Buber calls I-thou moments, and I, in my slightly budget way, just call connection. And that is what we really crave, how we really flourish, what we are really looking for. So what can we do? You will have your own answers to this, and I'd be really interested. I don't know who's in the room today. I know a lot of you are formed by the Christian tradition, but many of you won't be, and I'd love to know where you go looking for this. For me, as someone so easily caught up in these dynamics, I want to get the actual claims of my actual faith into my bones and into my blood. To marinate in them, declare them, sing them, tattoo them on my body. I have not done that yet because, as we have discussed, I'm not very cool, but I might one day, as a sort of protective spell to the wider story about where to ground my sense of self. Because my faith calls bull. Did you notice? I bleeped it out because I'm with Americans. Faith calls bull on all this nonsense. Its central story is a figure who met everyone, from the lowest outcast to kings and rulers, and looked them in the eye. He looked up or down on nobody. The early church was radically egalitarian, made up again of people the wider culture despised, and though they cringed in deference to. And in that community, again, I'm sure imperfectly, but aspirationally and sometimes in reality, none of that mattered. The story logic of my faith paints humans as made to be in communion, not competition with each other. It affirms my particularity and locates it in a web of relationships. It makes it possible some days for me to believe myself seen and known, gazed upon lovingly. It claims I am complete already, my self-evaluation secure, and declared by an entirely just and kind external arbiter who just wants to hang out with me. It invites me to be part of something that I don't need to construct or strive or perform for. My faith has helped me both become aware of and sometimes even able to extricate myself from status anxiety and status games. I'm trying to take seriously that every human being is made in the image of God, unutterably precious and entirely equal before him. And this is, in fact, powerful medicine. Atheist philosopher Alan de Botton has written an amazing book on this topic called Status Anxiety that I wholeheartedly commend to you. And Christianity is one of his 3 antidotes to status anxiety, even though he does not share its views. He acknowledges that this audacious claim can act as an antidote, because it claims that not only are status games empty and pointless shadow posturing, but that if any hierarchy exists, it is upside down. Theological anthropology, if we let it, can undercut our desire to be special, which is really a desire to be better than. When Dash, in The Incredibles, is told by his mother, "Everyone is special, Dash," and he replies, which is another way of saying no one is, he's saying something profound. We've been taught to value ourselves almost entirely in comparison. And the idea of the imago Dei and equality in the love of God is an invitation to resist that. It says it is possible to be entirely loved and entirely unremarkable in being so. I think there's a next session called Being an Average Joe in the Kingdom of God. I love it. Some days I love it. Some days, when I sit with this thought, my ego feels abraded because a big part of me wants to be special, as in better than. But when I can notice that and have some compassion on it and bring it to the feet of Jesus, that eventually gives way to relief and a deep sense of connectedness. Rowan Williams expresses more eloquently, as usual, than me, what I feel. He says his faith is a way out of the fearful and cautious negotiation of my identity, because God alone is beyond the precarious exchanges of creatures who need affirmation. With God alone, I am dealing with what does not need to construct or negotiate an identity, what is free to be itself without the process of struggle. The Message translation of Matthew 5:5, "Blessed are the meek," is, you're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourself proud owners of everything that cannot be bought. When I read the Substack piece about charismatic people, the root of the word charisma was so clear to me. And many of you have more theological education than I, so you will know that the root of the word charisma is the Greek word for gift or grace. Truly charismatic people are a gift to others because they know what they have received. If we knew ourselves in the light of grace, really knew it, how would we show up in the world? What kind of traces would we leave on other people? I'm trying to live towards a God who never needed me, never needed anything from me, who was loved before the universe began, but wants me, welcomes me, delights in my presence. And I am trying to practice haltingly loving others as I have been loved, as it invites us in 1 John 4. And I have been loved freely. And so I so want to learn to love freely. Live freely, listen freely, give people my attention freely. But it's important that we remember that charisma means gift, because I don't want you to go away thinking you need to strive to change into someone you're not. I'm aware that the days I manage to move through the world like this, and they are few, but they are real and they are so fun, are partly due to my unusually healthy childhood. The wounds of not having received a human gaze can sometimes get in the way of us knowing that we are gazed on and called beloved, and we may need some specialist help with that. But for today, I don't want you to hear that you have to change your whole personality or become super extroverted, because unfortunately, extroversion is not a spiritual gift, I am told. We do not have to pretend that we are not wounded, that we never get anxious, that we are not sometimes intimidated by people or dismissive of people or want to get something from people. Most days, those are all me. But what I'm finding is that becoming more aware of these tendencies, calling bull on them, and then seeking to take them and root them back into the gift of grace really helps me unclench. When I can turn my attention again and again on the source of stability and healing and safety and unconditional love that I find in Jesus, it changes me. And so I hope that if all of us, and you're probably really far ahead of me on this, if we can all continue to turn our attention toward what we need to stabilize our sense of self, we will find help in becoming, in our own particular, sometimes quiet, more truly, beautifully charismatic people. Thank you very much. We've got time for just a few questions, I think, if anyone would like to ask a question.
I've got a mic right here.
It's always a great sign when I've... There's one here, thank you.
Got one here.
Put me out of my misery.
Thank you so much. This is not really a question about what you just said, but more to say thank you for Fully Alive. My husband and I have both taught it separately in our churches.
Wow.
And I guess my question is, can you next time write something that is directed right at the church? Because I think the church also needs to hear your voice directly, as much as I have loved and appreciated the angle that you came from in Fully Alive. That's my question.
So the context for that is that my particular calling is to be a sort of border stalker, crosser of tribes, and the book is an attempt to translate some of this wisdom for the many, many people in the UK who are searching for wisdom and hungry and suddenly spiritually open and prepared to consider that Christianity might have something to offer. I'll sit with that. I'll think about it. I feel underqualified.
Okay, over here.
Thank you so much for such a great talk. Can you please go into how this relates to anxiety? Because you said you were going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, so I have, I can maybe get an email from you, because that's the theme of that I've been doing in the last few weeks. So I don't think I can probably summarize, because it's like my lifelong battle. But my understanding of our scriptures is that they really, so as far as, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I can tell, fear and anxiety, it was never in any of the list of the 7 deadly sins, and there were several. It's not so much that it's positioned as a sin, but as a soul danger. It's something that can form us. That one of the definitions that Luther and Augustine both use of sin is homo inconvertus in se, which means humanity turned in on itself. And so I think we are warned against sin because it can stop us moving outward to each other. And I believe that we were never designed to be our own safety. Like, God is supposed to be our safety if we're Christians, and we are each other's safety. Like, we are designed to be able to keep each other safe. And that in anxiety, we can go to that slightly clenched, idolatrous thing, like, I'm going to keep myself safe. But what's been helping me is the fact that I think the Psalms and lots of the rest of my scriptures are essentially emotion processing technology. That I think it's Brueggemann who talks about the sort of structure of the Psalms being reality, lament, hope. And so when I'm feeling very clenched and anxious, I actually need to let myself go down. I need to find other people or artistic practice or prayer practices that allow myself to be really honest. And what if you read the book, you'll see I'm very honest about quite a lot of existential anxiety. And the only way I can find to sit with that healthily and not let it form me into someone worse is to find ways to process. I often think that a really good church service is us co-regulating with other people. And real prayer is us co-regulating with God. And that's what I'm trying to do with my fear. Not beat myself up about it, but notice, get better at that loop of tower clench, surrender to steadiness. Which I think a lot of robust spiritual practices help us go through that process.
Okay.
Elizabeth, thank you. I don't want to make the assumption about people in this room, but I venture to guess that some of us are from what in the United States we would call mainline traditions.
Yeah.
And I think your talk was such a breath of fresh air, because I can say that as much as I wish that mainline Christians wouldn't take themselves so seriously, I can say as a pastor that I know that your career in taking yourself seriously, you benefit a lot from the status games that exist within the church. And so I'm just wondering, how do we get the church to take itself less seriously? How is it that we can invite ourselves to laugh at ourselves, even when we are in part of institutions that just really love the pomp and circumstance?
Thank you. So again, I feel like there's probably other people in this room who know the context better, who can help with that. My feeling is that the vibe of Mockingbird is quite helpful, actually. This is not a place that takes itself that seriously, and so probably that's part of what the draw is for some of you coming to a place that can be really real and theologically robust and rooted and have a sense of humor. This is nice. So I had never heard status anxiety preached on in a church until I started getting interested in it. And so my best answer, which is a bit of a budget one, is make it something you are continually helping each other be aware of. And again, my answer to most things is formation. I was speaking to, I think, MJ in the queue about the slightly different national cultures. Brits have our own endemic sins. This is not. But that kind of very strivey, very status-aware presentation in the world is slightly less endemic in the UK because the idea of taking ourselves that seriously is mildly embarrassing. It's just not the self-deprecation, irony. That's how you gain status. See what I'm doing? I can win the game anywhere. No. Yeah. Honestly, I don't have a good answer to you, but I think increasing awareness and trying to work out what strong enough counter formation to that, because they're in that almost all of the time. And it's probably in these, it's only really possible, deep relationships of trust and respect where we can gently call each other on it, because otherwise it just sounds like accusation and we can get very defensive.
Elizabeth, thank you for taking the questions. Everybody, Elizabeth. Thank you. Will you sign for us over
Yeah.
here? Elizabeth will be signing when we go to breakouts, if you want to go by and grab a book and have her sign it, I'm sure she'll write something very profound.
No swearing.
Dave, tell us about our breakouts.
Thank you.
Wow, what a privilege, what an honor. Let's give her another round of applause. That was so great. And just in case you haven't read Fully Alive, it is a master class in the border stalking that she talks about. It's really what some of us are just aspire to, but also very, very grateful exists. So thank you for writing it. It's such a great book. Elizabeth, and it's such a joy to have you, but not to look up to you. Straight in the eye, right. I'd like to invite the presenters for the breakouts to come up, and I see MJ, and I think Chad and Alicia are here, David, Kim is here, and Dr. Collier. I want to say, though, before they get up, we have the most wonderful group of volunteers who are helping us run this conference, and almost all of them are from the congregation at this incredible church, St. George's, Calvary St. George's. So can we please just express some gratitude for them It really is. It is such a privilege and a pleasure to be in this wonderful space, this funky Mockingbird Calvary St. George's space year after year, and I hope it never ends. Okay, over to you, Blake.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so we're going to be talking about the fear of faith, the dread and terror of faith, and why the antidote may actually be worse. So we're going to get super vulnerable, and hopefully y'all will interact with me, because that would make my presentation a lot better if you did that. So I'll be right here in the sanctuary. Come join, and we'll have some fun.
Hi, I'm MJ Layton, and my talk is Imputation and the Freedom of Normalcy, How to Be an Average Joe or Jane in the Kingdom of God. And we are going to talk about how the imputation of Christ is the antidote to this need to be special that Elizabeth described so well in her talk. And it is the antidote precisely because it does not make us special. Come find out why that is really good news. And it's going to be in the chapel over there.
Love that. Some of you may be very tired about hearing about AI, so I apologize for this. But I am writing this down because I am a Presbyterian minister. And so if you give me the mic, I will take it as long as I can. So here, I have to read from my note as a result of that. AI is the most significant technology developed in all of human history. And more money has gone into AI than any other technology. And in a recent TED Talk, the technologist Tristan Harris said, "We're currently releasing the most powerful, inscrutable, uncontrollable technology we've ever invented that's already demonstrating behaviors of self-preservation and deception that we only saw in science fiction movies. We're releasing it faster, and we're releasing it, and we've released any other technology in history, and with under the maximum incentive to cut corners." That's a great introduction for this. So how is the gospel, which is the most counterintuitive and renewing power on earth, shaping the development of AI? This is an important space for the church. And how does the gospel inform our framing of AI? And how do figures like C.S. Lewis and the philosopher Charles Taylor inform our vision of what AI could become? So you're welcome to join this breakout in the crypt downstairs and to explore how when spiritual wisdom is combined with collaborative knowledge, hopeful intelligence is born.
Hi, I'm Alicia Hauge. This is Chad Hauge, my husband. We are leading what I've coined the boozy breakout. It's called Michelin Stardust, and it's about how we, as a married couple, decided that we would open up a cocktail house despite pain points in our family history regarding alcohol.
And right, when you feel called into an industry that can bring death and destruction as easily as it can bring life, and you believe that work is prayer, what happens when you see your work start to unravel? What does that do to your sense of calling? And what does that do to your prayer? So we're going to be exploring that. And if you do join us for the Cocktails with Paul Zoll, we're going to be providing the cocktails for it. So there's a QR code up there that you guys can scan, and that will give you the menu. And one of the reasons we wanted to give you this now is because we know there's always a bottleneck for drinks, and especially when we're introducing cocktails. We've actually designed 3 cocktails with alcohol and 1 without alcohol for you, and I'm just going to briefly go down them for you right now so you don't have to ask the questions to your bartenders when you get down there. So the first cocktail, if you scan it, is going to be called Original Zin, and it's actually inspired by a lecture from Simeon Zoll that I attended at Wheaton College, and it is Zinfandel imputed tequila, wherein we freeze tequila to negative 50 degrees for 2 days, at which point the water in the tequila can turn to ice, and we replace it, or impute then, the tequila with Zinfandel. Then we fat wash a chartreuse or an alpine liqueur with lamb fat, and then kind of freeze it, skim it off, and filter it. So there's no actual fat in your cocktail. And then there's rhubarb and ginger and lime in that one. Then there is a Royal Corpse Reviver. So it is a cocktail that was invented to cure your hangover, but instead of that, we're going to be using the cocktail as a way to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. And so there, we clarify the cocktail with antipectin enzymes in a centrifuge, and then we use a pH indicator called butterfly pea flower to turn it a Herr Frederick-like purple. And then finally, we have an old-fashioned variant called a Small Relief. And it is Buffalo Trace bourbon infused with a burnt orange peel in a sous vide environment. And then there is a caramelized orange peel Genepi triple syrup. And if you're out there and you're like, what is a Genepi triple syrup? Well, Genepi is an alpine flower, and it happens to be the most hopeful flower that exists. If you want to know why it's hopeful, you can come on down to our talk in Olmsted next to the crypt.
Wow. Well, goodness gracious, that's incredible. I didn't know any of that was happening. It is 1:53. The sessions will begin at 2. They'll go until 3. Then there's a sort of a longer break. And cocktail hour, a sort of a formal cocktail hour, will begin back here and in Olmsted at 4 o'clock. At 4:30 up here, we'll gather for sort of to watch some magic from the great McNeilio, who's joined us from the Pacific Northwest, and also then to hear from my father for Drinks with PZ. That is then followed by a concert in the chapel from Sandra McCracken. So lots to look forward to, lots to take part in, but also, pace yourselves, especially if you're going down to Michelin Stardust. Thank you for being here. See you soon. Don't forget Elizabeth will be signing out, I think, in the hallway.
Hey guys, when we do a breakout in the sanctuary, it's better if you come closer. Obviously, we've all figured out where we're sitting for the rest of the conference, but all those assigned seats are off. It's all over. Come up close, because this is going to be awesome, Blake, and I want them to be here. And I've heard tell he might even step off the stage and walk towards you, like a close-up magician in Vegas. So you definitely want to be close for that.
All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Beautiful. So a brief introduction, perhaps, is my name is Blake Collier. I have been writing for Mockingbird since October of 2012. If I'm not mistaken, I think my first article went out on the day before Halloween of that year, and I have been grateful to this organization ever since. Any audience that I may or may not have is because of Mockingbird. And so I am excited to be here speaking to you all today, and hopefully we'll learn something about our fears and our anxieties. Seems to be a running theme so far. So first off, I'm from the Panhandle of Texas. We are a people who repress our emotions. So I'm pretty much, my wife gets mad at me because I'm just chill all the time. It doesn't matter what happens, but I will say, you'll notice that on the screen, there's another name next to mine. That's Ian Olson, my good friend and collaborator, and he's not here. So that is because he had prior engagements with family, and so he needed to care for them. And so when I found out that I was going to be in the sanctuary and that y'all chose for me to be the most attended, so therefore I'm in here, I sent him a text message last night and I called him a not so nice name. So this is not my normal space. I'm a writer, I'm not a speaker. So bear with me. So today we're going to be talking about the terror of faith. This is a question that popped into my head back in probably November of last year when David allowed us to do this talk. And it kind of formulated in my head for a long time. And of course, I'm a procrastinator, and so I did most of the actual work in the last 2 months. But we're going to first talk about the ongoing motif that's going to be kind of behind this whole presentation, and that is the fear of God. Hopefully its meaning for you will shift and stretch and grow during this presentation. But first, when you do hear this term, and feel free to just yell it out, we'll get into actual more interaction longer. That's great. But right now, just yell it out. What do you think of when you think of the fear of God in our current modern age? What comes to mind? Podcasts. I'll get there. Intimidation. Yeah. Good. Respect. Yep. Very much so. Anything else? Homosexuality. Okay. Yeah, that is actually very intriguing. That's its own whole talk itself. So, one way it gets used, and my friend Andy, doing his due diligence over here, one way it's used is in a podcast title, The Fear of God, which I'm on from time to time, and you really should listen to it. It's about horror films and kind of looking at them from a faith perspective. And Reed and Nathan, if you're watching right now, that's a free one for you. You're welcome. But you know my Cash App account too, so feel free to, give me something there. I personally, in the last 5 years or so, have had issues with the saturation of the language of faith. I struggle with knowing what the words we use in the Christian kind of ambience of the American culture, what they mean anymore. For me, it's this idea that, I could go to a theological dictionary and look up what this term means, but it doesn't actually mean anything to me, and the chances are they're going to use a term that I also think is watered down and saturated. And so for me, this ultimately ends up being kind of an issue that drives a lot of my writing and a lot of my thought. The fear of God falls into that category. It feels amorphous. I'm looking for something that can scrape the pavement of actual meaning. And I think we've lost a lot of that with our current Christianese, as it's so put by various writers and speakers. So Ian knows that whenever I often text him and say, what does the glory of God actually mean? Because I'm thinking to myself, I know what it's supposed to mean, but like, how am I supposed to live that out? What does it actually look like? And these are the spaces where I find myself saying the words in church as mere abstractions. Things that, like, yes, I'm affirming, but how do they actually bear on my existence? The fear of God is one of those that we're going to try and find the meaning for today as kind of a background idea, because I think it's central to what we're going to be digging into. First off, you'll see on the slide, the phrase fear of God is largely denuded in our post-Enlightenment society. So in many ways, the Western world, with the decline of rigorous religious affections, the term is not heard commonly, or not terribly commonly. When it is, it's most often in Christian spaces, in the church, in the home. It never really reaches beyond respect or honor of God. This is what I grew up with, and I'm assuming this is what largely y'all kind of grew up with as well. The fear of God didn't really actually connect with anything that I feared. I didn't have the same response to the fear of God as I did to, say, a well-placed finger chop in a horror film, a jump scare, anything like that. So basically the question for me was, okay, well, if it's actual fear, why don't we just, if it's honor and respect, why don't we just use those words? Why fear? What is it about fear that is driving us to God? I think that in many ways, this separation of emotion from intellectual knowledge denudes God just as much as not even recognizing the term in the first place. The term is used all over Proverbs, sometimes in the Psalms, occasionally elsewhere like Job 28:28 and 2 Corinthians 5:11, and perhaps the most terrifying book of all, Revelation 14:7. But it seems most tied to wisdom. Has anyone read the relatively recent book, Dominion by Tom Holland? Anyone? Okay, so I haven't had a chance to read it, but I've heard that the general gist is he's kind of reinvigorating the relatively old theory that Christianity is as the being of the very foundation of our current society, our governance, law, etc. And that the secularizing of all of that is basically separating the goods from the origin. Now, I would generally speaking fall in line with this theory, but I'm a trained historian, so I know it's never that simple. No theory is the smoking bullet. But it does seem that the terminology that we use around the fear of God follows in this trajectory. All of these characteristics are largely accepted within our current world, but without much of the religious ambience that the terms originated in. Though I am pretty skeptical of the concept of secularity as a whole, I'm using it for clarity's sake in this talk. I think the questions that come up in my mind when I hear the phrase, and am inundated with these largely positive connotations of the above terms, are, what is it about the fear of the Lord that should make me do or be anything of these things? What about God intrinsically instills these things in us? And what is on the other side of an improper fear of God? So I think it's time for us to refamiliarize ourselves with a church father that has largely been forgotten. Leave it to me to find the obscure ones. I like to do that. It's a pastime. One of his homilies will help us decipher what we are grasping at here. Has anyone heard of this man named Saint Augustine? No? Okay. I didn't think so. I thought I would be bringing something surprising to you all. So I promise this will be the only wall of text in this presentation, but I tried my best to trim it down. And as you know, anyone who likes Augustine and reads them knows it's really hard to make it into a digestible amount. So let's move on to this lengthy bit of text. Namely, it is said in a certain place of the Psalms, the fear of the Lord is chaste, enduring forever. But if he there shows us an eternal fear, does this epistle perchance contradict him when it says there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear? Let us interrogate both utterances of God. There is then a unison there. There is a harmony, only it requires one that can hear. Behold, the Spirit of God has breathed into and filled two hearts, has moved two tongues, and we have heard from the one tongue. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. We have heard from the other, the fear of the Lord is chaste, enduring forever. How is this? The notes seem to jar. Not so. Rouse your ears, mark the melody. It is not without cause that in the one place there is added that word chaste, in the other it is not added. But because there is one fear which is called chaste, and there's another fear which is called not chaste, there are men who fear God, lest they be cast into hell, lest haply they burn with the devil in everlasting fire. This is the fear which introduces charity. But it comes that it may depart. For if you, as yet, fear God because of punishments, not yet do you love him whom you in such sort fear. You do not desire the good things, but are afraid of the evil things. Yet because you are afraid of the evil things, you correct yourself, and beginnest to desire the good things. When once you have begun to desire the good, there shall be in your chaste fear. But what is the chaste fear? Fear lest you lose the good things themselves. Mark, it is one thing to fear God lest he cast you into the hell with the devil, and another thing to fear God lest he forsake you. The fear by which you fear, lest you be cast into hell with the devil, is not yet chaste. For it comes not from the love of God, but from the fear of punishment. But when you fear God, lest his presence forsake you, you embrace him. You long to enjoy God himself. That's a lot. But I think what Augustine is saying here is that the fear of God, properly conceived, is a real, visceral, existential, and material concept. It seems to me that Augustine is talking about something here that very much scrapes the pavement of meaning. He's tying the concept of the fear of God to our psychology and the actual fears that inundate our everyday lives. I've started utilizing the term divine terror, which I feel in a post-Lovecraftian world gets at the holy otherness of God and pushes back against perhaps an overly therapeutic understanding of him in familial and relational terms. Those things are good and beneficial, of course, but we cannot forget that he is still the creator of all things. And though he became man, is still beyond our comprehension in his purpose and even love. awe itself actually probably comes the closest to betraying itself to the side of divine terror. If it wasn't for the fact that when we think of that word in our modern context, really the only thing we think about is probably witnessing beauty and complexity of nature or a scientific discovery. Or if you're my wife, she will go into the Palo Duro Canyon, and I'll explain what that is, because I know that's probably not known by a lot of people. She will descend into the Palo Duro Canyon, and she will start to cry, because she's so moved by the action of descending colors, the whole scene. It's one of my favorite things about my life. The Palo Duro Canyon is pound for pound better than the Grand Canyon. I'm just going to say that right now. Anyone who has been to the Palo Duro Canyon, the colors, like, they're just vibrant. The Grand Canyon's huge. Don't get me wrong. We can't beat that. But we can beat it in just the awe of the colors and the beauty of it. So how familiar are we, how familiar are we with dialectical thinking? Anyone know dialectic? Sort of. So I honestly am relatively new to it. It's only come onto my radar in the last 7 to 8 years, which perhaps betrays my Marxist tendencies politically. However, even if you're not a dirty traitor to the American cause, as McCarthy would have it, the concept of the dialectic can actually be very helpful for us as Christians. As you can see, it's been around at least as long as Augustine. He's taking two seemingly diametric items, putting them together, and letting the tension resolve itself naturally. The Bible forces us into this form of dialectical reason often. We are commanded to do one thing, and in another passage, seemingly commanded to do another. It's antithesis, or its opposite, as Augustine astutely shows in his homily. Past thinkers such as Hegel and Barth noted that there is always a void, an incompleteness in any thesis, which must be revealed through its negative or its antithesis. The tension drives us to resolution, which then hopefully illuminates that which is incomplete initially. So the idea here is to maintain and feel the discomfort of tension until resolution appears. This is often hard to do in an increasingly polarized society. We tend to want to make everything black and white. We want to pick a party, we want to pick a side, and we don't allow tension to come into our existence. So, I think this gives us enough context in order to jump into hopefully the fun part of this talk, where we get to psychoanalyze ourselves. But first, Ian and I are kind of the horror guys at Mockingbird. So, it seems kind of bad for us to do a presentation with a horror clip, right? I tried to make it tasteful. I tried to avoid any kind of goriness or anything. So this is a really talky clip. But as my wife watched it last night for the first time, she actually was terrified. She doesn't like horror. But it was tense. I don't know how many of y'all have seen Heretic from last year, starring Hugh Grant. We are going to watch a section of this movie. Now, what goes on in this movie is basically a fairly simple conceit. Two female Mormon missionaries come to the house of seemingly kind man, played by Hugh Grant. He invites them in, and they begin the typical discussion we have whenever those missionaries come to our door. What they don't realize is that he's playing a game with them, and the game gets more and more insane, and there's a Dante-esque flavor to the whole film. I highly recommend the movie. But what we're going to do is we're just going to watch a section of the part where things start to crumble for those people, or for the missionaries in this moment. sure how to play it. Is there any way to play that? Anyone? Yeah, I did. No? No one? Okay, well, we may watch it here in a little bit. We can move on. So, I'm going to come down here for this part because I think if we're going to be vulnerable, I don't need to be up there. I want you all to think about the next question. This question right here that you see. Give me the things that most terrify you about faith. As people who believe in Jesus, what keeps you up at night? Okay, so this is a question I asked an informal poll of people I know, and we're talking people across the spectrum of Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, lay people, priests, pastors, conservative, liberal, all pretty much across the board. I probably asked about 40 to 50 people, tops, ultimately, and got their answers and kind of tried to bear out a thesis about what we're kind of looking at here. So while I am going to start with Ian and I and our fears, I want y'all to think about, what do y'all fear as people of faith? And if y'all are so open to this, being vulnerable and brave, we can talk about it. We can dissect our own fears. But first, I thought that as someone who needed to up my game for Mockingbird, I needed to use some charts, some data, things like that. Very scientific stuff. And as you'll see, well, you can't actually see the names on there, and that's fun. So the green part is supposed to be about 75%, and it said, what the hell? When I asked this question, the response I got was, what the hell? The blue part was, never considered that. Okay. The pink part, that little small part, that's like 2-3%. That was, completely normal question. That was Ian and I, by the way. So, anyways, I worked very hard on that. It didn't show up properly, so I'm gonna just let that be a nice little bit of comedy there. So, Ian. Ian. His was the confirmation that I am fundamentally helpless. Didn't frighten me very much. It was more of a boon, confirming the suspicion I've had for a long time. I think that what frightens me is that the same Lord who meets me in that helplessness to save me speaks to me as one who also can do things now. I am expected to act, and I have often sometimes still feel not up to the task. So what are we looking at here? If we are going to psychoanalyze Ian, what's behind the fear here? Anyone have any thoughts? Failure? Yeah, very much so. Failure, yes? What's that? Control, yes, very much so. Yeah, so when I look at this, I think of the fear that we are basically looking at a God that doesn't actually have no strings attached. There's something that's ultimately going to, the other shoe's going to drop. We're going to have to do something. Otherwise, we're not getting into heaven. And I think failure and I think control are very much keys to that. So for me, mine is I've yet to find myself in irreparable doubt about the existence of God and the salvation brought by the blood of Jesus. Perhaps what I find myself contending with is becoming so saturated in the day-to-day forward motion of life that when I do die, I will no longer be saved. Not out of active rebellion in life, but rather in the slow decay of belief through unconscious and passive apathy and distraction. I suppose, ultimately, I doubt the efficacy of the Spirit. What, and don't feel like you're going to hurt my feelings, come on. What's behind this? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Fear of unknowns in the future and abandonment. Yeah, very much so. Fear of humiliation and being wrong.
Maybe you haven't felt that your wife felt through pain, and you haven't been through that
Yeah,
event.
yeah,
When you go through that event, it makes a difference.
yeah. The unknowable, inexplainable awe of God. I haven't been through that, and I think that's reasonable. I come from a people that are not charismatic, and we're talking not necessarily in the way Elizabeth said, but more in the sense that we just keep it all inside. But I think you're right. I think there is something to that.
To rip off the title of this, it sounds like a fear of faith.
Yeah.
Like a fear that without there being any doubt that it's not actually faith. It's
Gotcha.
just a pure belief with no trust.
Yeah, so an actual fear of doubt, that maybe if there is no actual doubt, then it doesn't mean anything. There's not substance to it, or there's not that antithesis to kind of ride out the drive of that substance. Yeah, I think these are all great. And I just want you all to know that everything I say today, I thought up like 6 months ago. It's very possible I am wrong about all of this, okay? So this is like more workshopping for me. Does this actually bear up? Because this is something I'd actually like to write about later on. So I think there's one other entity that is missing from the psychoanalysis. Should we do it? Should we do the unthinkable and psychoanalyze Mockingbird? Anyone? Okay. All right. Let's think about all of us who love Mockingbird, who ascribe to their basic tenet, law and grace. As people who hold on to that and affirm it, what are the fears that could come up in that space? What are the fears that could be behind us? They're constantly just in the back of our head, playing at us, just moving a little, decaying away a little bit at a time. Yes? Yeah, so basically Nietzsche was right, that we're all a bunch of failures, needy failures probably, and that we're not actually doing anything great. We're not living up to our full potential as the Ubermensch, I believe he termed it. I probably destroyed that as well, so don't feel alone. Yeah. Anyone else? Ooh, okay. Sounds good for everyone else, but maybe it's not real for me. That's great.
We go around saying there are no strings attached, but maybe there are.
Yeah.
Now we think that there aren't. But one day we're going to find out there are, and we're going to be screwed.
Yeah.
Not the political life.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yes.
Well, this is from the outside, but fear of criticism.
Ah.
I walk out from LA, and the neighbor can see that my car goes every Sunday. You go to church, don't you? And then one of the girls, I swear to God, she said, people who go to church are morons. Okay, there's a punchline here. And I said, oh, well, I'm not listening.
Yeah.
And I didn't take any offense. And then about 2 weeks later, she called me and said, would I help her make an audition tape? That's on camera.
Yeah.
I said, me, the moron?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a very just generally human fear of criticism of any sort, but specifically in this space of faith. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder sometimes if the message of grace, as great and wonderful as it is, and as true as I think it is, I wonder sometimes if it not only draws the people that are fully aware of their failures in life and are I guess to some extent repentant, penitent, whatever language you want to use, but it also could be drawing in narcissists who are misusing, who are demanding on grace more than, and they're doing it for their own personal desire to do whatever they want and yet be, quote unquote, forgiven. I think that's a fair fear. Yeah. 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 So would you say vulnerability and self-deception? How would you word that? Okay. So would you say it's like a status differential? Like in our vulnerability or our suffering or whatever it may be, we are one-upping. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's an issue in general in culture right now. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. So yeah, when I asked this question, I talked to various people, and it was interesting because what I found was that it kind of broke itself down into interesting ways that we'll get to in here in a second. But it was really just fascinating to see people be vulnerable with sometimes a text message or a phone call. It's weird to say really hard stuff in a text. It's really hard sometimes to say that over a phone call because mediation creates that disconnect. We can't see the person's face, we can't see their eyes. And so it's tough. But I was surprised at how willing people were to divulge that. And then I would send them a text saying, okay, I'm writing your name down and I will speak your name with the fear for everyone. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. The only people we wanted to do were Ian and myself. And if y'all were open to it, bring it out to y'all. So I want to give y'all a chance. If y'all have had a chance to think about it, if y'all are wanting to throw yourself out there, I want to give this time for that. Yes?
I've never heard anyone have this fear, but I have a fear of eternity.
A fear of eternity. Okay. Okay. I don't think that's weird at all. Mine is probably less of fear and more of that seems kind of boring. But the only thing I have to go off of is life by itself, and so life in eternity seems, I don't know, a little rough. But of course, I'm denoting that there is a massive difference between the life we know now and the life on the other side of the veil. Yeah. Fear of God's will. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, wow, okay. Yeah, I think I've been there myself in some ways. Yeah, that's really good. I hadn't heard it put so plainly. I appreciate that. Anyone else? That's almost in line with mine. It's almost in line with the idea that, like, the end of my life, it's all adds up to nothing. Yeah. There's someone back here. Oh, there's two people. Let's start with you. Yeah. So that your trust in God has a time limit or a constraint of context. Yeah, I think we've probably all felt that to some extent. It's like the idea of if someone paid you enough, you would do anything. You know, the idea that there's a price point. What is the price point for when you would betray him? Yeah. Yes.
I think I'm afraid that Christianity is too easy for me, and that because it feels, if my daily life is just being Christian, and I'm not constantly picking up my cross in a way that feels really difficult, then I'm somehow not really following Christ. That
your version of the Christian life is too easy.
Yeah.
It's too comfortable, maybe?
Too comfortable, yeah. If it's comfortable, it's not Christian, I guess is the word.
Okay, yeah. If it's not comfortable, if it's comfortable, it's not Christian. No, that makes sense, especially when we have these great stories of the martyrs and missionaries, and it just seems like you go through life, you go to your 8 to 5, you go home, you play some games, watch Netflix, get up the next day. It doesn't always feel very, I don't know, Christian. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes?
All right, with all due
Yeah.
apologies.
Yeah, no, you're good.
And the spiciness of this vulnerable psychoanalysis. My fear is, you know, when I meet my maker on Monday morning, because I stepped across the street without looking, he will say to me, Christine, did you spend the whole weekend at St. George's listening to talks about grace, or did you spend it in the prisons and visiting, you know, the prisoner and feeding the hungry, clothing the naked? And
Yeah.
were you well fed? Did you have a good time? Or were you, you know, feeding my sheep?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, you got me.
Well, it's the constant issue of what we term self-care. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian and to do all those things, those valuable, meaningful things, and yet be reinvigorated? And what does that look like? And sometimes it feels more like a good time than it does like for Jesus, you know? Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I've had that as well. I'm feeling less or more and more vulnerable as y'all talk because I feel like I've got all of y'all's on some level. So, yes.
I think I fear a lot about wrong opinion.
Yeah.
I suppose in the sense, especially like with so many denominations of Christianity existing now and different claims that are made by each of them, and I think, you know, I land myself in like having certain opinions and preaching about things and saying that they're true and having justifications for it. But I've had opinions before and I found them to be wrong. And I guess I'm always concerned not only about personally holding wrong opinions, but also leading people astray because of my own like incorrectness.
Yes. So the fear of having the wrong opinion or the wrong knowledge that you're basing your faith on. That's really good. And actually, that's one that came up often in my communication with people. Let's do one more if there's someone else who wants it. Let's do you. Fear of judgment. Okay, yeah. It's once again, it's kind of that string is attached. Like, you know, what is the end goal? Okay. No, those are all great. And so I want you all to think about that and hold those fears in the back of your head as we kind of go through the rest of the presentation. I worked on this next chart even more than the last one. It probably won't show up correctly, if I had to guess. But 8 hours, I kid you not, 8 hours to put this one together. And this was basically to kind of delineate the types of fears that the people who talked to me displayed. Okay? Let's see how it shows up. Yeah, so what do we fear? It's anyone's guess, really. You can't really see that, so. But it's 50-50, that's clear. So yeah, one side is orthodoxy, and the other side is orthopraxy. So the interesting thing that I found is when I would kind of separate the answers I got and kind of categorize and kind of put it together. It didn't take me 8 hours. But processing what people are saying and kind of building up theories and ideas of what is behind those fears like we just did. I found that people were either concerned about right knowledge or right practice. And weirdly enough, they were separated politically too. Oftentimes, my more liberal Christian friends were more concerned with the practice, whereas my more conservative friends were concerned with the knowledge. Okay? So, how do we exegete our modern fears? So, this idea of orthodoxy and orthopraxy has been kind of in the background as well. Knowing I would have to make a good portion of this talk impromptu, it gave me some fear that the thesis would not hold up. I would actually have to write these down and think about them more. I think it does, but, you be the judge. And I'm okay with being wrong. It wouldn't be the first time, it won't be the last. So, orthodoxy, to riff on this, like I said, tended to be more conservative, theologically minded people. And there was this idea that we consider the multifaceted elements of orthodoxy, or right, correct knowledge about the reality of the divine, true and right belief. The unchaste fear inherent here is an intellectual control which intends to know our way into salvation. The search for knowledge as a means to have a true and accurate dogma and belief is still works-based. We struggle with this. I know I have. As someone who came out of a conservative theological church life, I would say that it's true. We have this idea that we know the right dogma, and then that's going to give us a protective bubble. And somehow that's going to incarnate salvation inside of us. But the problem with this is that it's kind of a post-Enlightenment idea. It's separating the body from the mind. This idea we separate the mind and the knowing from, religiously speaking, the body of Christ. Both have to be there. We can't just know and then take the body and blood. They have to be of one piece. we just don't see it as that. Because in the Enlightenment, often, in many ways, tore asunder that connective tissue. When we know, we don't see it as work, but as a means to present ourselves to others as holier or as someone who better understands the faith. While on the other side, we have orthopraxy. The compartmentalization here is ultimately the same. It's just that we're relying on practice or the right ritual, right and true practice. The unchaste fear here is an activist control, which intends to act our way into salvation. This is what conservative theological people think of as works-based religion, okay? We're acting our way into heaven. But what's going on here is the true and accurate practice of faith is, whether desired or not by the person, still housed in a certainty, a dogma. We still believe that what we are doing is right and good, and it ends up almost being like a carrot to the horse of God. We're saying, well, we did all these things that you asked us to do. You have to let us in. And once again, we have that segmentation between the mind and the body. We need to find a way to unite those again. Both categories of fear fall into black and white thinking, when in fact they should be held in tension, like we talked about with the dialectic. At all times, until a resolution comes about. And this is often in the means of God's revelation or breaking into the world. In the terms of Flannery O'Connor, it's a divine violence. It's unexpected. It's something that comes to us and says, you have failed, but you are worthy. You know correctly, but you're still a failure. You have done this, but it's still me who lets you into the kingdom. All these things. We live in a world of polarity, and by introducing another polarity into the world, I felt like I needed to try to find a way to bring it back to united front. You know, in this day and age, either you're Republican or Democrat or the extremes of either one. Or there is the classic science versus faith, which seems to pop up every, 50 years. Why not? And then the ever-splintering divides that become apparent between different classes, genders, races, creeds, etc. And if we linger in that space too long, it can feel hopeless. I don't know about y'all, but I don't necessarily feel super hopeful in this day and age a lot of times. So there is a real, lucid, psychological cause for some version of fear. But I think at the core of our human fear, what actually makes us recognize our humanity and our humanity, at the core of all these fears is a split between who we think we are and who we try to present as, and who we actually are. I think it is fair to say that this split is at the origin point of fear, and that original fear was caused all the way back in the garden at the fall. These days, in order to find some semblance of unity in our world, we can't just avoid our fears. We have to lean into them, and on the other side is the grace given due to our most significant failure as a whole race. This, I think, is at the core of why Ian and I love horror. It forces our hand, even when we don't want it to. It makes us reflect on the how and the why of our fears. So, what is the antidote? What is the antidote to all this? To all the fear, all of the terror of faith? Well, I don't know. Y'all may know this word at this point, but relief. At the outset of finding out that David's always going to let us do this, he hadn't told me the theme. So I had been developing this idea without, a theme in mind. And about, I guess, beginning of this year, I asked him what the theme was going to be, and he said relief, and I was like, all right, I think I may have to rework this, because it's not looking too good. I was honestly perplexed as to how to work it in. But then I decided to do what any good cherry-picking Christian does. I did a word search in the Bible. I was like, well, where does relief show up? And I had to try various different translations because you'd be surprised, relief doesn't show up all that often. It was actually harder to find references to relief in the Bible than, say, fear. But I found them eventually. Yet I was a little taken aback by what I found when I did find them and found the context in which those words were being used. I realized that maybe relief was actually more terrifying than fear. But why? Why is it more terrifying? Well, here's some verses as an example. Exodus 8:15 from the NIV. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Or Nehemiah 9:28 from the Holman Christian Standard. But as soon as they had relief, they did what was evil in your sight. So you abandoned them to the power of their enemies, who dominated them. Then they cried out to you again. You heard from heaven and rescued them many times in your compassion. It seemed that more often than not, when relief appeared, it fell within a context in which it was shown, and then us creatures followed it with the hardening of our hearts or doing evil actions. And God left them to their own devices. They were in control of their own destinies. And it didn't turn out well in the Bible most of the time. So what does relief require? Relief requires us to relinquish all control. Anything that remains we seek to exert control over will end in fear, anxiety, and grief. And I think we can look at the rich young ruler as an example of this. Relief, hold on. Now behold, one came and said to him, Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? So he said to him, Why do you call me good? No one is good, but one that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. He said to him, Which ones? Jesus said, You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The young man said to him, All these things I have kept from my youth. What do I still lack? Jesus said to him, If you want to be perfect, go, sell what you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me. But then the young man heard that saying. He went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Okay. It seems that our rich young ruler still had control issues. If you contemplate outside of the Bible story that we have, if you put yourself in the shoes of the rich young ruler, there's a world in which you could see that sorrow, but also the anxiety about his salvation and the state of his salvation after that interaction with Jesus. So, who knows how to do this? Who knows how to relinquish all control? Anyone? No? Really? Yeah? Okay, yeah, definitely. That's,
Can you repeat that?
yeah,
Can't hear.
yeah,
Oh,
yes,
we'll try. No,
Yeah.
I meant the speaker.
yes, sorry. How do we all, okay, who here knows how to relinquish all control? That's the question. And what is your name? Ida. Ida said that we're all trying. And I think she's right, it's a process. Yeah, yeah. I would say probably most of us, maybe some more than others. But let's think back to what Augustine said about the fear of God for a little bit. I sure don't feel like I have a handle on how to do this. And I think at some level, since the fall, the need to flex our misplaced sense of autonomy on this world and others is built into our disposition, our very being. So what do we do? And perhaps a bigger question, and the one that can't really be solved, is there anything we can do? Maybe we need to place our relational and familial understanding of God in tension with the creator of all things. The one who holds us all in the palm of his hand, the holy other, the divine terror. Because here's the thing about the fear of God. With both its positive and negative elements, it is the way of salvation. It is the tension in which we form our faith with fear and trembling. As Philippians 2 states, he is our Father to be sure, but he is also our Maker, whom we haven't viscerally or even vaguely fully comprehended since we walked with him in the garden. So I wonder if there's a inverse proportional relationship between seeking relief in the arms of our Creator and the lessening of our desire to control, and the negative qualities that inhabit our existence when we try to maintain that control over whatever it is, finances, our sanity, our very being. I think the only way that relief can truly come is when we look at these fears and we contain and linger in them and confront them instead of avoiding them. It seems, at least in part, many parts of the Bible, that relief finds its perfect bedfellow in the fears that are created by our need to control an outcome. The film that we didn't get to see, Heretic, it ends with Hugh Grant. He's kind of a Dante-esque tempter archetype in a Dante-esque world. He says that the first true religion was, in fact, control, and that humanity's affections have been at the foot of its altar ever since, regardless of the religious skin we place on it. Now, his version of this is very cynical. It's a monologue that's meant to be very cynical and very demon-esque. But what we do know about demons is they still know the truth. They just use it for evil purposes. Which I suppose brings us to another tension in the Bible that illustrates often throughout its narrative. It turns out that the antidote to our fears involves a terrifying being coming to us, telling us, "Be not afraid, for I bring good news." That's supposedly a image of an angel in true form. There were all sorts of different versions of it. It was pretty impressive, actually. But I think what we need to end on here is the fact that relief is sometimes in the moment it doesn't feel like relief. Sometimes it's the hard news of, if you have an addiction, being brought to an intake, or someone having cancer, or whatever it may be. The act of relief by God is not going to seem like relief in the moment. It's only later on in life, in hindsight, that you realize oh no, this was stripping away all the things that I thought I could control and allowing me to become who I was supposed to be, or at least moving in that trajectory. Yeah, I think that's everything. All right.
Thank you. The sanctuary is going to go through a transformation right now. At 4 o'clock, there's cocktails, and I know that you can order them. There are 4 interesting kinds, but that's at 4. At 4:30, there's going to be a magician, and then a conversation with Paul Zoll that we're going to set up in here, and then there is a 6 p.m. concert in the chapel, and everything is ending by 7. So then you can go and have dinner, and there's lots of places in the neighborhood that welcome Calvary St. George's folks all the time. So plenty of places to go. So thank you. So there's some of us that will start moving things around to get ready for the next thing. Thank you.